In June of 1996, Shawn Kemp walked off the biggest stage in basketball, looking like a man whose price had just exploded. The Seattle SuperSonics had lost the NBA Finals to Michael Jordan and the 72-win Chicago Bulls, but Kemp had not been exposed. He had been revealed. He averaged 23 points and 10 rebounds in the series. He scored 32 in Game 1. When Chicago tried to end the finals in a sweep, Kemp answered with 25 points in Game 4 and kept Seattle alive. For 6 games, while Jordan collected another championship, Kemp looked like the one Seattle player who refused to shrink. Then the summer began, and the Sonics made a decision that would change the meaning of everything Kemp had just accomplished. They signed Jim McIlvaine. McIlvaine was a 7'1" reserve center from Washington. The previous season, he had averaged 2.3 points and 2.8 rebounds. Seattle offered him a 7-year contract worth as much as $35 million with incentives. That next season, McIlvaine was expected to make roughly $4.7 million. Shawn Kemp, 4-time All-Star, Seattle's leading scorer, Seattle's leading rebounder, and the man who had just challenged Jordan in the finals, was due roughly $3.7 million. Even McIlvaine understood how that looked. He told a reporter, "There's no way I should make more money than him." And that is where the usual Shawn Kemp story gets the order wrong. Most people begin with the weight gain, the lockout, the giant Cleveland contract, the substance abuse treatment. They show the flying version of Kemp, then the heavy version, and tell you that fame ruined him. But by the time the public saw the weight, the first break had already happened. It began on a salary sheet in Seattle, just weeks after the greatest season of Kemp's life. This was not simply jealousy, it was not simply greed, and it was not as easy as saying the Sonics should have handed Kemp a blank check. NBA rules temporarily prevented Seattle from renegotiating his deal. The Sonics had a basketball reason for signing McIlvaine. Kemp had a human reason to feel humiliated. And what happened next would expose the worst instincts on both sides. One contract ended the partnership that made Seattle terrifying. It sent Kemp to Cleveland, where he finally received $107 million. It helped turn a spectacular star into a cautionary headline. But the most surprising part is this: even the famous story about the lockout ending Shawn Kemp is not true. He was still dangerous after the weight arrived. So what actually destroyed the Rainman? Did Seattle push him out at the exact moment it should have protected him? Or did one perceived insult merely give Kemp permission to stop protecting himself? To answer that, we have to go back to the first time basketball looked at Shawn Kemp and saw two things at once: a breathtaking gift and a frightening risk. Before Seattle gambled on Shawn Kemp, Kentucky thought it had recruited the future of college basketball. Kemp came out of Concord High School in Elkhart, Indiana, as one of the great prospects in America. He was 6'10", explosive, and powerful before most players his age had finished growing into their bodies. Scouts did not need imagination to see an NBA athlete. They needed only to watch him leave the floor. But talent could not solve the first problem. Kemp did not qualify academically to play as a freshman at Kentucky. The university had the player, the uniform, and the expectations, but not the basketball that had organized his life. Then came an incident that could have ended his career before it started. In the fall of 1988, 2 gold chains worth about $700 were reported missing from the room of teammate Sean Sutton, the son of Kentucky coach Eddie Sutton. Lexington police said Kemp had sold 2 chains to a jewelry store for $180. Sean Sutton declined to pursue charges, and the case was dropped. Kemp was not convicted of stealing them, but his time at Kentucky was finished. He left without ever playing a game. He moved on to junior college in Texas, but he did not play there either. Then, at 19 years old, with no NCAA film and no college resume, he entered the 1989 NBA draft. Think about what that meant in that era. This was long before high school stars entered the NBA in waves. Teams were being asked to invest in a teenager whose entire adult basketball education would happen in public. Every lesson would take place against grown professionals. Every mistake would be attached to a contract, a headline, and a franchise. The risk was obvious. So was the temptation. Kemp's body promised a kind of basketball that could not be taught. He could run like a wing, rebound like a power forward, and rise as if the defender under him were part of the launch pad. A polished college senior could help a team immediately. Kemp might change what the sport looked like. That tension would follow him for the rest of his life. The physical gift always arrived before the structure required to control it. Seattle looked at the missing college years, the Kentucky exit, and the uncertainty. Then the Sonics looked at the athlete. With the 17th pick, they decided the danger of passing on Shawn Kemp was greater than the danger of taking him. The SuperSonics did not draft a finished star. They drafted an argument with the future. Kemp signed a 6-year contract reported at roughly $3.6 million. That was serious money for a 19-year-old, but it was not a declaration that Seattle would build the franchise around him immediately. The Sonics planned to bring him along carefully. His rookie numbers were modest: 6.5 points and 4.3 rebounds in fewer than 14 minutes a game. If you looked only at the box score, you saw a reserve. If you watched him move, you saw the outline of something the league was not prepared for. Then Seattle added the player who would give that force direction. In 1990, the Sonics drafted Gary Payton with the 2nd overall pick. Payton was loud where Kemp could be guarded. He was demanding where Kemp could drift. He attacked the ball, the opponent, the referee, and sometimes his own teammates with the same sharp edge. Together, they created a simple form of panic. Payton pressured the ball. Seattle forced a bad pass. Kemp ran. Payton threw the ball toward a place no ordinary power forward could reach. A second later, the rim was shaking and the crowd was already standing. Years later, Payton would call them the original Lob City. But the connection was bigger than alley-oops. Payton supplied structure in motion. Kemp supplied violence above the rim. Each made the other's personality useful. That mattered because Kemp was never a conventional franchise star. His game was not built around holding the ball for 15 seconds and calmly selecting a move. He fed on pace, emotion, collisions, and the electricity of a building waiting for something reckless. In the right environment, that was not a flaw. It was a weapon. Seattle was slowly creating that environment around him. The team had veterans. Kemp had room to develop. Payton gave him a partner who could challenge him and still place the ball exactly where his talent wanted it. The numbers climbed. So did the expectations. And every leap made the bargain Seattle had struck with a teenager look smaller. By his 3rd season, Kemp was averaging a double-double. He was no longer an interesting project. He was becoming the face people paid to see. And then one playoff dunk transformed him from a rising player into a permanent image. In the 1992 playoffs against Golden State, Shawn Kemp caught the ball near the lane, took off, and met Alton Lister at the rim. Lister was 7 feet tall. It did not matter. Kemp drove the ball through the basket, landed, and pointed at the fallen defender. It was aggressive, theatrical, and impossible to forget. The dunk became known as the Lister Blister. That moment tells you more about Kemp than a page of statistics. He did not merely want 2 points. He wanted the play to leave a bruise on the opponent and a memory in everyone watching. The gesture afterward was part of it. Kemp turned basketball into a public confrontation, and fans loved him for it. The nickname Rainman fit because he did not appear to enter games quietly. He arrived like weather. But a player who builds his identity around physical dominance enters a dangerous contract with his own body. The audience expects the explosion every night. Coaches design around it. Teammates learn to trust it. And the player begins to believe the spectacular version of himself is the permanent one. Kemp was developing more than a highlight reel. He could defend, rebound in traffic, run either side of the floor, and score through contact. Yet the highlight became his public identity because it was so powerful. It made his discipline less visible and his lapses easier to excuse. If Kemp arrived late but destroyed someone at the rim, the dunk was what people remembered. If his emotions wandered but he changed a game in 3 possessions, the result covered the process. This is how extraordinary talent can hide ordinary warning signs. Not because nobody sees them, because the gift keeps paying the bill. Seattle still needed someone who could convert all that energy into winning basketball. The Sonics found him midway through the 1991-92 season when George Karl took over as coach. Karl did not try to make Kemp less dangerous. He built a system that made danger the point. Seattle was learning how to unleash him. It had not yet learned what would happen when the value on paper fell behind the value in the arena. George Karl's Seattle teams did not wait politely for the opponent to run an offense. They crowded passing lanes, trapped, switched, pressured the ball, and forced decisions before a possession felt comfortable. Gary Payton was the voice and the hands of that defense. Shawn Kemp was the punishment waiting behind it. This system demanded speed and instinct from big men. Kemp could hedge toward a guard, recover toward the rim, steal a pass, and finish the break himself. On most teams, a 6'10" power forward running in open space created a mismatch. In Seattle, it created the offense. The results came fast. In 1992-93, Kemp made his first All-Star team. The Sonics won 55 games, beat Utah, survived a 7-game series with Hakeem Olajuwon's Houston Rockets, and reached the Western Conference Finals against Charles Barkley's Phoenix Suns. Seattle lost Game 7, but the future seemed obvious. Kemp was 23, Payton was 24. The Sonics had pushed the league's most valuable player to the final game of the conference finals. They were not waiting for a window. They appeared to be opening one. And Kemp was becoming more than a dunker. In that series against Phoenix, he averaged more than 20 points while shooting with brutal efficiency. The deeper Seattle played, the more obvious his value became. Payton could control the perimeter. Kemp could bend the geometry of the floor. There was also a less comfortable reality. Karl, Payton, and Kemp were all intense personalities. They could challenge opponents and each other. Their friction gave the team energy, but it required trust. Everyone had to believe the confrontation served the same goal. For several years, winning made that bargain work. The Sonics entered the next season believing they were ready to move from dangerous to dominant. They won more games than any team in the league. They had home court advantage. They had the defense, the stars, and the scars from Phoenix. Then Seattle produced one of the most humiliating playoff failures in NBA history. And for the first time, the team learned that its emotional engine could power a contender or blow one apart. The 1993-94 SuperSonics went 63-19. It was the best regular season in franchise history at the time and the best record in the NBA. Their first-round opponent, the Denver Nuggets, had won 42 games. Seattle took the first 2 games easily. No number 8 seed had ever eliminated a number 1 seed since the league adopted the 16-team playoff format. Then the series changed. Denver won Game 3, then Game 4 in overtime. Suddenly, the deciding game was back in Seattle, and the team that had spent 6 months attacking everyone else was playing tight. Dikembe Mutombo controlled the lane. Gary Payton injured his foot. Kemp scored 19 points, but only 6 in the second half. Denver won in overtime. When the final rebound came down, Mutombo fell onto the floor holding the ball above his head while Seattle's season disappeared around him. That image became one of the defining pictures of the 1990s playoffs. For the Sonics, it became an accusation. Maybe they were built for television, but not pressure. Maybe the talking, the trapping, and the spectacular finishes looked stronger in February than in May. Maybe their emotional intensity did not sharpen when the game slowed down. Maybe it turned inward. The next season did not remove the stain. Seattle won 57 games and lost in the first round again, this time to the Los Angeles Lakers. 2 early exits changed the stakes of everything that followed. By 1995-96, Seattle was no longer a charming young team with time. The Sonics were a contender with evidence against them. Kemp was now a regular all-star. Payton was entering his prime. Karl had produced huge regular season totals. Another collapse would not be treated as bad luck. It would define them. That pressure helped produce the best basketball of Kemp's life. Seattle stopped treating the postseason as a place to prove how talented it was. The Sonics played as if every series were a trial. They won 64 games. Payton became Defensive Player of the Year. Kemp led the team in scoring and rebounding, and when the playoffs arrived, Seattle finally attacked its own history. The 1995-96 SuperSonics did not take the easy road to credibility. They beat Sacramento in the first round, then faced the two-time defending champion Houston Rockets. Hakeem Olajuwon had ended the previous 2 seasons holding the trophy. Clyde Drexler had joined him. Seattle swept them in 4 games. The team that had been accused of disappearing in the playoffs had just removed the champions without losing once. Then came Utah. The Western Conference Finals went 7 games. Karl Malone and John Stockton had the discipline and half-court execution that were supposed to expose Seattle's volatility. The Jazz pushed the Sonics to the edge. In Game 7, Kemp answered with 26 points and 14 rebounds. He made 8 of 12 shots and 10 of 11 free throws. Seattle won 90-86 and reached the finals for the first time since 1979. For Kemp, the performance completed a transformation. The reckless teenager with no college games had become the most reliable force in the biggest game of the season. The player known for dunks was beating Karl Malone at the free throw line, controlling the glass, and surviving pressure that had broken Seattle 2 years earlier. Then the opponent appeared. Michael Jordan had returned for his first full season after baseball. Chicago won a record 72 games. Jordan was the league MVP and scoring champion. Scottie Pippen was at his peak. Dennis Rodman treated every rebound as personal property. Seattle had finally become real in the worst possible year. The Bulls took the first 3 games. The series looked finished. But Kemp never looked overmatched. He scored 32 in Game 1, 4 more than Jordan, and kept attacking a front line designed to turn the paint into punishment. When Seattle returned home facing a sweep, Kemp and Payton extended the series. They won Game 4, they won Game 5. Chicago closed it in 6. There are losses that reduce a player's value. This one increased Kemp's. Against the most famous team of the era, he had looked like a franchise star. He had done exactly what athletes are told to do before asking for more: win, perform under pressure, and prove it on national television. The finals ended on June 16th. 5 weeks later, Seattle paid Jim McIlvaine. History remembers the 1996 finals as another chapter in Michael Jordan's 6 championships. That is fair. Chicago won. But if you isolate Shawn Kemp's performance, the series becomes uncomfortable for the simple story. Kemp averaged 23.3 points, 10 rebounds, 2 blocks, and shot better than 55%. He led Seattle in scoring. He scored 32 in the opener, 29 with 13 rebounds in Game 2, and 25 in the first Sonics victory. Dennis Rodman made him work for everything, but Chicago never turned Kemp into a spectator. That mattered because Kemp entered the series with questions the Bulls did not create. Could he stay composed? Could he deliver when the open floor disappeared? Could a player built on emotion survive the most disciplined dynasty in basketball? For 6 games, the answer was yes. Seattle lost for larger reasons. The Sonics fell behind 3 games to none. Gary Payton did not spend enough of the early series guarding Jordan. Chicago owned the offensive glass at crucial moments. The Bulls had more experience, more control, and the best player alive. Kemp's reputation still rose. This is why the summer contract issue cut so deeply. It arrived after Kemp had supplied his strongest possible evidence. To him, the sequence was simple. He helped carry Seattle through Houston and Utah. He attacked Jordan's Bulls without fear. Then the club gave a larger immediate salary to a center who had been a reserve in Washington. To Seattle management, the sequence looked different. Kemp had already signed a long extension. The new collective bargaining agreement limited when it could be changed. And the Sonics needed size in a West dominated by enormous centers. Both versions contained truth. Seattle was about to solve a basketball problem and create a psychological one. The center it signed was not a villain. In fact, Jim McIlvaine may have understood the danger more clearly than the people paying him. The summer of 1996 created panic among Western Conference TMs. Shaquille O'Neal left Orlando for the Lakers on a 7-year, $120 million deal. Hakeem Olajuwon was still in Houston. David Robinson was in San Antonio. Arvydas Sabonis gave Portland another massive body. If a team expected to reach the finals, it needed someone who could survive against giants. Seattle had reached the finals using a rotating cast at center. Sam Perkins created spacing, but he was not a traditional rim protector. The Sonics believed Jim McIlvaine could block shots, clog the middle, and preserve Kemp from absorbing every collision. That was the basketball logic. McIlvaine had blocked 166 shots in only 1,195 minutes for Washington the previous season. 7-footers with that skill reached free agency rarely. The market paid for scarcity, not fairness. Seattle offered up to $35 million over 7 years because it believed the final missing piece was size. McIlvaine was not useless. He started all 82 games in 1996-97 and led Seattle with 164 blocks. But the contract fit a roster need far better than it fit the emotional reality of the team. Through Seattle's first 9 playoff games, McIlvaine had 5 games in which he did not appear at all, and 4 in which he played only 14 total minutes. The player whose contract helped trigger Kemp's holdout was sitting while the player making less carried the front line. McIlvaine recognized the contradiction before the season. His salary reflected timing, he explained, not who was better. Kemp experienced the same number as a public ranking. For a star, salary is status written in numbers. Seattle could explain the market, the cap, and the CBA. What it could not do was make Shawn Kemp feel respected. Once respect became the argument, every dollar looked like evidence. The cruelest detail was that Seattle could not simply correct the insult. Kemp had signed a long-term extension in 1994, and the new labor agreement prevented another renegotiation until 3 years after the deal was signed. The Sonics could promise the future. They could not legally put a new contract in front of him in the fall of 1996. That defense was accurate and incomplete. Seattle could not change Kemp's contract in October, but it controlled the contracts it gave everyone else. It knew how the McIlvaine number would compare, knew Kemp's temperament, and knew he had just led a finals team in points and rebounds. The legal fine print would arrive only after the public saw the hierarchy. Kemp believed the Sonics had made that choice knowingly. In 1997, he said management understood the salary cap situation and knew he would eventually ask for a trade. His strongest line was not about wealth, it was about standing. "I play for respect," he said. But money was the scoreboard he used to measure that respect. That was Kemp's contradiction. He insisted the fight was not simply about dollars, while using the salary gap as proof of what he felt. Seattle also had reasons to be frustrated. It had committed long-term money before the finals made Kemp's deal look small, and the contract contained a huge payment at the end. Now the market had changed, and Kemp wanted the club to act as if the earlier agreement no longer counted. Neither side imagined the problem. A healthier partnership might have survived until a new deal became possible. Instead, Kemp disappeared from training camp. Training camp opened on October 1, 1996. Shawn Kemp was not there. He released a statement saying the dispute was not about money, then complained that the labor agreement denied veterans a true free market. The contradiction was obvious because the emotion was real. Kemp stayed away for 22 days. From his perspective, he had just fought Jordan on national television and returned to a team that valued a backup center more visibly than it valued him. From Seattle's perspective, its star was risking a championship season over a situation the front office could not immediately change. The holdout ended before the regular season. Kemp worked with assistant coach Tim Gregurich, returned to the team, and began playing. If this were only a story about greed, the performance should have collapsed. It did not. Kemp remained an all-star. He averaged 18.7 points and 10 rebounds. Seattle won 57 games and the Pacific Division. In the playoffs, he raised his production again. Against the veteran Houston frontline of Olajuwon, Charles Barkley, and Clyde Drexler, Kemp averaged more than 21 points and nearly 11 rebounds. The basketball still worked. The relationship did not. The Sonics were winning enough to hide a slow divorce. Every late arrival looked like a protest. Every disagreement carried a financial shadow, and neither side interpreted the other generously. By spring, the dispute was no longer simply about McIlvaine. It had infected the way Kemp worked, the way the team disciplined him, and the way teammates discussed the future. Seattle still had enough talent to chase a title, but Shawn Kemp had begun acting like a man who had already left. During the final weeks of the 1996-97 regular season, Kemp's discipline became a public story. He missed a team flight to Phoenix and a practice. He came off the bench as punishment. Within days, he missed or arrived late to more team activities. The Sonics fined him. What had once been treated as a manageable flaw now looked like open disengagement. A disputed report about a drinking problem prompted teammates to denounce the claim publicly. Even concern, denial, and loyalty were now playing out through headlines. And still, when the playoffs began, Kemp performed. Seattle survived a difficult first-round series against Phoenix and met Houston in the conference semifinals. The Rockets took a 3-1 lead. The Sonics forced Game 7. Kemp played almost 42 minutes in the deciding game and finished with 21 points and 10 rebounds. Houston won 96-91. The final loss gave both sides a reason to stop pretending. Seattle saw missed obligations and emotional exhaustion. Kemp saw a club that had paid McIlvaine, missed the finals, and never repaired the original insult. Soon after the season, he demanded a trade. Kemp later explained his position with a sentence more revealing than any salary number. He said he would have taken care of the person who took care of me. That was how he viewed the relationship. He had grown from the 17th pick into a 6-time All-Star and delivered in Game 7 against Utah and the finals against Chicago. Now he believed Seattle had failed the exchange. The Sonics saw another side. Nate McMillan said Kemp had stopped returning teammates' calls. George Karl spoke about focus and discipline. Management had to move a star before his anger destroyed his value. By then, the question was no longer whether the relationship could be fixed, but where Seattle could send him. On September 25, 1997, Seattle, Cleveland, and Milwaukee completed a 5-player trade. Shawn Kemp went to the Cavaliers. Vin Baker went from Milwaukee to Seattle. Cleveland sent All-Star guard Terrell Brandon, forward Tyrone Hill, and a conditional first-round pick to the Bucks, and received Sherman Douglas in return. Everyone could sell the deal as a solution. Seattle replaced Kemp with a 25-year-old 3-time All-Star who had averaged 21 points and more than 10 rebounds. Cleveland acquired the biggest name it had landed in years. Milwaukee rebuilt its roster. Kemp reached one of the few teams with enough salary cap room to rewrite his contract immediately. Even the Sonics had a powerful argument that they survived. In Baker's first season, Seattle went 61-21. Baker averaged 19.2 points and made the All-NBA second team. Gary Payton finished third in MVP voting. The trade did not instantly destroy the SuperSonics. That fact must be admitted because it makes the real loss clearer. Seattle preserved regular season success. It did not preserve the partnership that had reached the finals. The 1998 Sonics lost to the Lakers in 5 games in the conference semifinals. George Karl left after the season. Baker's production and health declined during the lockout year. The specific core built around Payton, Kemp, Karl, and their shared history was gone. Could that core have won a championship if Seattle had managed the contract crisis differently? Nobody can prove it. Jordan's Bulls still controlled the league. The Lakers were rising with Shaq and Kobe. San Antonio was about to place Tim Duncan next to David Robinson. But Seattle had already shown it could beat Houston, Utah, and almost anyone else in the West. Kemp was 27 when he left. Payton was 29. Their window had not closed on the court. It closed in the relationship. Cleveland now offered Kemp exactly what he said the dispute was not about. Money large enough to erase every previous comparison. The contract made him one of the richest players in basketball. It also removed the final excuse that underpayment was holding him back. From that moment forward, every change in his body and behavior would be judged against $107 million. In October 1997, Cleveland gave Shawn Kemp a 7-year extension, reported at approximately $107 million. He became only the 5th NBA player at the time to enter the $100 million club, joining Shaquille O'Neal, Kevin Garnett, Alonzo Mourning, and Juwan Howard. Kemp called himself blessed. He thanked Cleveland for stepping up and said he intended to prove he was worth it. For the first year, that promise looked reasonable. The Cavaliers were young. Brevin Knight, Cedric Henderson, and Zydrunas Ilgauskas were beginning their careers. Kemp gave the team an established star and averaged 18 points and 9.3 rebounds. He made his 6th consecutive All-Star team. Cleveland won 47 games and reached the playoffs. This was not Seattle Shawn Kemp at full speed, but it was not a collapse. He was still powerful, productive, and capable of carrying an offense for long stretches. Yet the visual change had begun. Reports said he arrived in Cleveland roughly 25 pounds above his Seattle playing weight. The player, whose game had depended on beating everyone down the floor, was asking his body to move more mass through the same collisions. The contract amplified every concern. At $3.7 million, Kemp had been the underpaid star. At more than $8 million in the first Cleveland season, with 20% annual raises reported to follow, he was the investment everyone inspected. That is the trap inside the victory he fought for. The new money delivered respect, but removed protection. In Seattle, a bad night could be blamed on the contract dispute or the organization. In Cleveland, the organization had done exactly what he wanted. The Cavaliers were also not built like the Sonics. There was no Peyton controlling the emotional temperature, no Karl defense turning chaos into open-floor attacks, no established veteran core that knew how to pull Kemp back without humiliating him. Cleveland had purchased the star. It could not purchase the ecosystem that had created him. Then the NBA shut down. The 1998 lockout lasted more than 6 months. For a player already showing conditioning concerns, the removal of team structure was dangerous. When Kemp returned, the body that had made him famous had changed dramatically. And the public decided it had found the exact moment his career died. The famous version goes like this. Shawn Kemp entered the 1998 lockout as an all-star, gained more than 30 pounds, returned unrecognizable, and was never the same player again. The first part is supported by years of reporting. The second part is not. Kemp did return far above his ideal playing weight. Accounts disagree on the exact number, which is why the legend should not be reduced to one perfect figure. Whatever the scale read, the difference was visible. But during the shortened 1998-99 season, Kemp averaged 20.5 points. That was the highest scoring average of his NBA career. He also averaged 9.2 rebounds, played 35 minutes a night, shot 48.2% from the field, and attempted more than 9 free throws per game. A man supposedly finished by the lockout was still forcing defenses to foul him and producing like a star. The Cavaliers were not good. They finished 22-28 and lost 10 of their final 11 games. Kemp's body was less explosive, and the team was paying a massive salary for results that did not translate into winning. But the evidence refuses to give us a clean ending. The weight was not the death of Shawn Kemp's career. It was a warning that his margin for error had disappeared. A lighter Kemp could arrive a fraction late and recover with lift. He could gamble defensively and still meet the ball at the rim. He could run through fatigue because his game produced energy. A heavier Kemp had to work harder for every recovery, every landing, and every second jump. The statistics stayed alive because talent can delay consequences. He still had touch, strength, timing, and a superstar's ability to reach the free throw line. But the cost of producing those numbers was rising. That is why the following season matters more than the lockout season. In 1999 to 2000, Kemp played all 82 games and averaged a respectable 17.8 points and 8.8 rebounds. Yet his field goal percentage collapsed to 41.7. Cleveland was no longer looking at a star adjusting to a new body. It was looking at a contract that would become harder to move every year. The public had seen the warning and called it the ending. The real ending arrived when the numbers could no longer hide what his life had become. In August 2000, Cleveland traded Kemp to Portland in another three-team deal. On paper, the move offered a return to the Northwest and a place on a contender. In reality, Kemp entered a crowded Trailblazers roster as an expensive role player. His minutes fell from more than 30 a game to fewer than 16. His scoring dropped from 17.8 points to 6.5. The Rainman, once the player who changed the temperature of an arena, was now trying to find a shift behind other veterans. This is where the decline stopped being a debate about body type or offensive systems. In April 2001, Kemp voluntarily entered treatment for cocaine abuse and left the team for the rest of the season. Portland publicly supported the decision. Because it was his first violation under the NBA program, he was not suspended, but he entered aftercare and testing. The following season, he was suspended 5 games for failing to comply with that aftercare program. Portland eventually negotiated a buyout. Kemp had roughly $46.5 million remaining on his contract. Reports said he surrendered more than $25 million to leave. The deal that had once proved his worth had become so burdensome that both player and team paid heavily to end it. Orlando gave him one more NBA opportunity in 2002-03. He appeared in 79 games, started 55, and averaged 6.8 points. In February 2003, the league suspended him after a third violation of the anti-drug policy. Then the NBA career was over. Kemp was 33. This was the genuine fall, not one bad photograph, not one number on a scale, but the loss of role, reliability, health, and control. The spectacular body had protected him from consequences for years. The Cleveland production had postponed the final judgment. In Portland, nothing remained powerful enough to hide the struggle. It is tempting to draw a straight line from Jim McIlvaine's contract to cocaine treatment and declare the mystery solved. That would be dramatic. And dishonest, Seattle did not cause every later decision. Underpayment did not force Kemp to miss meetings, neglect conditioning, or violate the drug program. The contract dispute explains the break from the environment where he had been most successful. It does not erase his agency after he left. The tragedy is that both truths can exist at once. Seattle mishandled the star it needed, Moisate. And Shawn Kemp responded to disrespect by making choices that cost far more than the original salary difference. For all the anger surrounding his exit, Shawn Kemp never stopped belonging to Seattle. The franchise eventually moved to Oklahoma City. The green and gold uniforms became nostalgia, yet Kemp remained one of the people fans associated most strongly with the city and the team they wanted back. In October 2020, he became part of a group that opened Shawn Kemp's Cannabis in Seattle. Gary Payton attended the opening. The basketball partnership was gone, but the connection and Kemp's place in the city had survived. Then, in March 2023, another moment of anger placed his name in national headlines. After his truck was broken into, Kemp tracked a stolen phone to the Tacoma Mall area and confronted the suspected thieves. Shots were fired. Kemp said a man in the other vehicle fired first and that he returned fire. A witness reported gunfire from 2 people. No one was injured. In May 2025, Kemp pleaded guilty to second-degree assault. At sentencing, the judge recognized that the circumstances included self-defense and imposed 30 days of electronic home monitoring rather than jail plus supervision and community service. After the hearing, Kemp said he wanted to speak against gun violence, especially to young people. His advice was only 2 words: think twice. It is impossible to hear that phrase without thinking about the holdout, the missed flight, the lockout, the habits that became treatment, and the split second outside Tacoma Mall. The Rainman had built a career on acting faster and rising higher than everyone else. Decades later, his own lesson was to pause. So who broke Shawn Kemp? The answer depends on where you stop the tape. Stop it in June 1996, and he looks almost untouchable. He is 26 years old, coming off 64 wins, a decisive Game 7 against Utah, and a brilliant finals against Michael Jordan. Stop it 5 weeks later, and Seattle looks reckless. The Sonics give Jim McIlvaine a contract that places his immediate salary above Kemp's. Even McIlvaine says the comparison is wrong. Stop it during the holdout, and Kemp looks unreasonable. The collective bargaining agreement prevents the Sonics from renegotiating. His absence cannot change the rule. A contender is waiting, and he stays away. Stop it after the trade, and Kemp appears vindicated. Cleveland gives him $107 million. He makes another All-Star team and reaches the playoffs. Stop it after the lockout, and the easy story says his body has ended everything. But keep watching. He scores a career-best 20.5 points per game. The famous ending is only a warning. The real collapse comes later. Reduced efficiency, a trade, a reserve role, cocaine treatment, aftercare violations, a massive buyout, and a final suspension. No single villain can hold all of that. Jim McIlvaine was not the villain. He accepted the contract Seattle offered and openly admitted Kemp deserved more. The Sonics were not irrational. They needed size against Shaq, Hakeem, Robinson, and the giants of the Western Conference. They were bound by a labor rule that made an immediate Kemp renegotiation impossible. And Kemp was not simply a victim. Whatever Seattle communicated with its salary sheet, every missed obligation and destructive habit afterward still belonged to him. But management is not innocent merely because its decision was legal. Seattle had built a contender around combustible personalities. It knew Kemp's talent, his insecurity, and his importance. Then, immediately after his greatest performance, it created a public symbol that told him somebody else was worth more. Maybe a more disciplined star would have waited. Maybe a more perceptive organization would have found a way to make waiting feel like respect. Instead, the best version of Shawn Kemp left Seattle at 27 years old. The Sonics still won 61 games without him, so we cannot pretend the franchise died overnight. But the partnership that had challenged Jordan never returned. Seattle never reached another finals before the team itself disappeared from the city. That leaves the question no statistic can settle. If the Sonics had never signed Jim McIlvaine to that contract, if the salary sheet had never become an insult, would Kemp and Payton eventually have won a championship? Or would Shawn Kemp's appetite for speed, emotion, and risk have found another reason to escape control? My answer is that Seattle lit the fuse, but Kemp kept carrying it. The organization made the first critical mistake because it confused a legal contract with a healthy relationship. Kemp made the greater mistakes because he allowed disrespect, real or perceived, to become permission for self-destruction. That is why his story remains larger than a dunk compilation and more complicated than a photograph from the lockout. Shawn Kemp did not fall because he stopped being talented. He fell because talent had always arrived before restraint. And for years, Seattle had been the one place where the two barely stayed together. What do you believe mattered more? The contract that broke the trust or the choices that came after it? And if you remember the Rainman at his peak, do not remember only the fall. Remember how high he had to rise before any of it could hurt this much.